Let's start with our motivation. So every single day, every single minute, we are experiencing the results of causes that we created in the past, because everything that functions is created by causes. It's not the case that there can be something that functions that has no cause. So causes are always ripening into results every moment in our lives. And similarly, we're creating causes for new results in every moment as well. And so everything is changing moment to moment as previously created causes ripen into results. And in response to the results we experience, we create new causes that will ripen into other results in the future. So this is a very natural process. Nobody created it. There's no way to stop it when you're talking about conditioned phenomena. So the challenge becomes how to, in terms of ethical conduct, how to abandon creating causes that produce pain, and how, when previously created causes for pain ripen, how to respond to them, how to deal with the suffering. And so to realize that with conditioned phenomena, this practice, this process of ripening of old causes, creating new causes, cannot be stopped. But so the challenge is how to then create the causes for happiness and how to abandon the causes for suffering. And when we experience suffering from previously created causes, how to endure that suffering and how to transform it so that we don't create more causes for suffering in response to it. And so this also involves accepting that while we're in samsara, unhappiness, misery, and so on, these things exist. And instead of screaming out against them, to try and research the causes and figure out how the process works so that we create the causes for the kind of people and we want to be and the kind of situation that we want to have. And so generating bodhicitta is the best way to do that, because it involves having love and compassion for all beings, and because of its scope, referring to all beings, and especially because it wants to lead them all out of samsara, then any action done with that intention becomes quite powerful. So even if our bodhicitta is fabricated, still very good to generate it. One day it will become spontaneous. And so let's do that now as our motivation for sharing the Dharma together this evening. Okay, so we're at the part of the Lamrim talking about the perfection of ethical conduct. And I heard that last week you started discussing the first type of ethical conduct, which is the ethical conduct of abandoning nonvirtue or negativities. And so I wanted to continue with that because my interest here is we've heard, most of us heard teachings on karma or read the section on karma in the Lamrim Chenmo. And so we know there has to be an object, or there's a motivation. The motivation has three parts. Then there's an action, then there's a conclusion to the action. And the examples used are examples, that are fairly straightforward and that would apply to all cultures at all historical times. Predominantly, the one about sexual ethics, I think, changes according to culture. But what I'm interested in is talking about new special ways of creating the 10 non-virtues that arise because of our particular time period and the influence of technology, the influence of mass communication, rapid transportation, the political climate, the attitude that people have towards society now. And so I think that we see a lot of new, and I'm not going to say improved, ways of creating non-virtue. So I think it would be good to talk about it and, highlight it. A friend of mine in Singapore did a book called One Life, Five Precepts. We have some copies. And she put it together in a fairly traditional way, the explanations of things. And it's a very good book. But when I read it, I thought, I would like to see it updated in terms of what's happening now. She was, of course, very hesitant to do that in Singapore. There's a lot of conservative elements in the society, and so some things, not so good to talk about in a Dharma book. But in our society, everything goes, as you know, sometimes too much. And so I had asked her permission a while ago if I could amplify the book and redo it. She said that was fine. So this talk is part of that thing. And it's also part of, the whole topic of trust, which we may want to do a booklet on too, because ethical conduct is the chief way that we establish trust with other people. Don't you think? Yeah. Did you ever think of ethical conduct as the method for establishing trust in your relationships? Yeah, we often don't think of it that way, but it really is. Yeah, because if we keep good ethical conduct, people feel safe around us and they trust us. If we don't keep good ethical conduct, they feel quite anxious. They don't want to be around us. And it creates a lot of tension. Yeah. And similarly, ethical conduct relates a lot to how we choose friends. I remember years ago having a discussion with some college students about criteria for choosing friends. And it was so interesting because, they spoke about, what they looked for in friends. And so much of it had to do with people who kept good ethical conduct. You want a friend that you can tell them something and they're not going to blabber it all over the place, or somebody who you can, trust with your possessions, who's not going to damage them or something like that. And so how much, we usually think of ethical conduct as, I don't know, some kind of subject that's kind of in its own enclosed area, but it actually influences friendships, it influences creating trust with people, and I think it influences our mental well-being. Yeah. And I would like to put out there here, not as a general statement, but as something to think about, of how when people have different psychological problems and need counseling or therapy or whatever, how much of that has to do with ethical conduct. That either they haven't kept good ethical conduct and feel remorse or guilt, or maybe other people haven't kept good ethical conduct in relationship to them, and they're dealing with the pain that comes from that. And at the same time, sometimes when you're dealing with the pain from the effect of others' bad ethical conduct on you, you recreate that same bad ethical conduct on somebody else. Yeah. Show how the people who have been victimized often become perpetrators, or even if they don't become perpetrators of the same thing they were victimized by, it comes out in terms of lying, in terms of harsh words, divisive words, physical violence. Yeah, and then that too, that's a psychological issue that has to do with the effects of, not keeping ethical conduct. Okay, so I think it's something that relates to many areas in our life and would be good to talk about. So I scribbled down some ideas through the 10 non-virtues of things that I thought of that people may do now that they didn't do before. Yeah. Or that wasn't so much an issue before in other cultures. And so I thought to just bring these up and we can discuss them and also have you bring up your thoughts about things that I've missed. Okay, so let's just start with killing, and we'll see if I think of something that you didn't touch on last time. Okay. Did you talk about euthanasia? So you talk about assisted suicide. Okay. And what did you come up with in terms of assisted suicide? Yeah, that if there's an advance directive, then the friends and relatives aren't put in the position of shortening the life of somebody else. Okay, so assisted suicide, it affects the person who is suiciding. Yeah, because suicide is a negative action, although it's technically not a full action of killing, because to be a full action, the person that you kill has to die before you. So if you're killing yourself, that doesn't happen. So it's not a full action of killing, but it is considered, like a branch of killing. And for the doctor, for the relatives, yeah, it is killing. Although this is a very good example of, I bet a lot of people would push back about, when hearing this, saying, but we're doing it out of compassion. That person is suffering. They've chosen to end their life. Isn't it compassionate to help them do that? Yeah, especially if they have severe mental or physical pain, because they're terminally ill. So what would you say if somebody said that?
I would say that if a person's illness and impending death is managed properly, that it isn't something that they can't tolerate or something that they can't.
In other words,
do.
that there's medication that can be used to remove
Many different things.
Yeah.
Many different things. Yeah, so if one is prepared properly, like, if they go into hospice, then generally it's, a more easeful death. So I don't buy that we can't manage it. It would be too much, and so we have to end it. And that the thing about compassion, it really, I think, is the people around that person. It's their personal distress that they can't manage.
Yeah.
So, for example, what if I was a person who was sick and um, this might be the same thing, I'm not sure, but if I don't want to see my parents go through that suffering and put an end to my life, what is that then?
You mean if you were sick
Yes,
and your parents are suffering by seeing you sick?
correct.
So you're thinking of ending your life so that they don't have to see you.
Right. I mean,
being
if I
sick.
like, I was referring to if I was like in a hospital, I was in a bed, and like just on like tubes on me or something, and then just like taking off the tubes. Just that's what I mean.
Yeah. So you're not. Is the issue so much? What's the issue? Is it the ability to take out the tubes yourself, or is the issue not wanting your parents to suffer by seeing you sick?
The issue is my parents. Yeah,
Which
my parents.
your parents?
Yes.
Okay. Again, I think that in that situation, we're kind of mind reading what we think somebody else is feeling, and even if they are feeling worried or distressed, seeing you, terminally ill or whatever, there sometimes when life in those kind of crucial moments, sometimes people can really have a breakthrough and have some very deep communication that they didn't have at any other time in their life. And so if you end your life thinking that that way they won't see you suffer, you may be preventing that time of communication. Yeah. Also, if you think your parents would suffer that much seeing you ill and dying, then don't tell them. I know it sounds strange, but I know from in my own family that my mother essentially told me, not in so many words, but that if I were seriously ill, she did not want to know because it would be too stressful and painful for her. So, extrapolating on that, if you think somebody's going to be so upset by that, then they don't need to know. Yeah, if that's your concern is really for them. These are my ideas. I'm not saying this is the only way. I'm sharing with you some ideas. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So euthanizing pets. What about that?
What I'm finding very shocking, and I learned that this year, is that most people in the world think they're doing their pet a favor. Even the veterinarians, even the holistic veterinarians,
Yes.
are totally trained and totally prepared to come to your home and euthanize your pet, where we wouldn't make that same decision for a human being most of the time.
Yeah.
And so veterinarians know that they have, the capacity to medicate the pet too, but the culture out there is that people get to a certain point, and I saw this with someone very close to me. Fortunately, the dog died naturally, but I knew it was getting to the edge where my sister was like starting to crumble, thinking that the best thing to do for this dog was to end her suffering.
Yeah.
But we're not mind readers. We don't know. And we don't know what will happen out of that extended period if it's managed. That we can't just assume that we know what's best for another living being.
Yeah. Lama Yeshe used to reply to that question. It came many times to him that if we have psychic powers and we know that the animal is going to be born in a definitely in a better rebirth than it is in now, then yes, out of compassion, that's fine. But if you don't know where somebody is going to be reborn, you may be inadvertently hastening their lower rebirth. Also, especially with pets, I think it's very good to play mantras, to recite texts, to use that time to, and for human beings too, to put good imprints on their mind stream of the Dharma. Yeah, and that can also soothe their anxiety as they approach death.
For myself, ending life means lack of courage. I look at my life, the times that I had difficult times, and how I see the mind that wants to escape it instead of looking at the gift of it. Because life has something special. The process of life, everything, it has I don't want to say magic, it's not that, but there's something, what's the word?
I think we know what you mean.
Okay. And when you play with that, anyway, for me it's a lack of courage, ending any life. I've seen it. I was working in a hospital, and it's a long-term care, and there was a person that she ended their life, and they supported her doing that. It was awful, really awful, and not that person, like when she arrived there, every little thing was always a problem. The light in the window, this and this and this. You could see the character, like there was a lot of despair in that person, and it was hard to live with it.
Yes.
So I'm getting out. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
That's how I saw it.
Yeah. People not knowing how to work with their minds. Yeah. I hope people don't mind if I cut the discussion short, because otherwise we'll stay on one branch of one precept the entire session, and I would like this to move along. Okay? So please excuse me if I don't call on you. Okay. What about terrorism? Yeah. Act of killing. But it's kind of a new, is it new? Is it old? Did ancient cultures have terrorism? Or was it that they had, very clear declarations of war so that the soldiers fought and everybody else was spared? Terrorism seems to have to do with killing civilians, not just killing the military, the soldiers. So war definitely is killing. But terrorism seems, did ancient societies have terrorism? You think so? And if they had it before, why is it something so crucial and seemingly new now?
I think all cultures had terrorism as far as war would go. I mean, places would go into another place and sack the whole entire, get rid of everything that they had. Or one thing that I could think of in history was, I think in Transylvania there was a guy, he was a ruler, and he would impale people and stick in like a forest of people, so that when when soldiers would come, they would see this, and it was his own people, things along that nature. And I think terrorism is just like a modern term for stuff that was going on. So I think that that's always been, been a situation.
Cordial greetings, Venerable. The literal definition of terrorism is defined as violence motivated for political reasons. And today, the term terrorism has been, in a way, given a new definition directly targeted against one ethnic or ethno-religious group. So when people hear the word terrorist, they automatically think of one region. So the term has been manipulated in that sense. And many acts of modern terrorism would definitely include, for example, the nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, for example, and also the napalm in the Vietnam War. These are definitely, by definition, these were acts of terrorism. And terrorism has certainly existed during the Crusades when even the Crusaders, they had killed Jews, Muslims, and even other Christians who were Eastern and other religions. So that was like one of the medieval forms of terrorism. So it has always indeed existed. And we can also see the expulsion of Jewish and Muslims from Spain in 1492, also as terrorism.
So terrorism, it instills fear, but is terrorism always involving killing? Well, let's do the 4 points. You've been studying the debate, the 4 points between killing and terrorism. So what's an example of something that's both killing and terrorism? A suicide bombing or 9/11. Okay. What's killing but not terrorism? Is there an example? Okay, is there something that's terrorism but not killing? Kidnapping. Yeah. And something that's neither? And don't just say the table. Think of something that, could be close to either of those. Democracy? Yeah, it's an example of something that's neither. Sometimes when you try and find something that's neither, you want to see if you can find something that's kind of close to those two, but not really. Yeah, an accident or torture.
Torture could be or could not be depending on
Yeah. Yeah, it could be. It could be terror, couldn't it? Okay, let's just leave that for right now. Okay, but capital punishment, so this is, something that societies have used, for a long time, but it seems, now it's quite a big issue in this country. And thank goodness, it seems that people's ideas are changing about it. What I find interesting is, do people's ideas changing about capital punishment mean that when people believe in it, then it's okay to do it, but when people think it's harmful, then that's when you create negative karma? Are you getting what I mean? Does your creation of negative karma from capital punishment depend upon what people in society think about the action? Yeah, it has more to do with yourself. Yeah. Now, what about if you work in a prison, you do not believe in capital punishment, but you are assigned to help in state murder. I should say capital punishment. That's.
If you're honest with yourself, you would quit. You would get out of there. You would not accept to do that job.
Yeah. They say that if you are forced to kill, it's not your choice, but you're forced. Like, let's say you're captured in a war situation and they want you to go out and kill somebody and you're forced, then they say that, the karma, it's not a complete karma because you were forced. Now, does having a job mean you're forced? Or does having a job entail that it's done voluntarily? And what about people who say, I'm just throwing out ideas to get you to think here. What about people who say, but I have to feed my family, I can't afford to quit my job?
It seems to me like in all those situations, even if somebody's saying you're going to kill this person or we're going to kill you, you still have a choice. You are making a choice whether you're going to die or they're going to die, or you're going to make a choice whether this other person's going to die or you're going to feed your family. There's still a choice of what you're prioritizing, and you're choosing to kill, then you're choosing to kill.
Yeah, you still have a choice, but and it's very clear that there's a choice involved. But it's interesting that they do say if you are pressured and forced like that, then it seems like, yes, you have the motivation to kill, but the motivation to kill is a reluctant one. It didn't come from your side. The idea to kill didn't come from your side. It came from the side of somebody else who was pressuring you into doing so. But it's still,
You're also probably not rejoicing in it, which is also making it weaker.
a mitigating, if you don't. Okay, now what about video games? We were talking about this in the car. Yeah, people who make video games that kids play where, you're shooting and killing in the video game. Now, that's not actual killing, so we know it's not a full, there's no action, there's no object, and so on. But is playing, what's the karma of playing a video game in which you're killing? Yeah. And what's the karma of designing a video game in which you are encouraging kids or adults to, to shoot people in the game?
So with the players, they're rehearsing killing. And so this is often, young children who get hold of these games, and it goes right up until people in their mid-20s. The people who are designing them are visualizing how to get these people to do the killing in a game. So again, it's rehearsal of killing.
But it's killing in a game, so it's not actual killing.
But isn't that still planting seeds in the mental continuum of doing violence?
I think it is. But are the people who are inventing these games, are they saying, are they consciously thinking, I want to encourage other people to kill? No, their motivation is, I think this will be an enjoyable game for people to play. And I'll earn money, right? Yeah. But, that's the same for people who design dresses and people who make carpet. We can't just say that because somebody has the motivation to earn money that what they do is negative. Yeah. I mean, we want people to be responsible and support their families and things like that. So we can't just across the board say everybody who goes to work is committing negative karma because they're trying to earn money to support their family. But, what kind of attitude do they have when they're inventing a game like that?
I think just the mind frame that thinks that killing and harming is part of fun and is part of what can be enjoyable is a mind that's it's sowing the seeds of increasing that inclination to carry out the action themselves, or it's just it's normalizing harm in one's own mind as acceptable, as fun, as fine.
So would you include that under killing, or in terms of the 10 non-virtues, what would you put that under?
I would put that under killing because I see it's
But nobody's getting killed.
but it's creating, I guess, like malicious intent because it's increasing the intent to harm.
But the kids aren't having malicious intent, are they? Or are they? You know? Are they? There's this little blip. Do they hate that blip? But it's only a blip.
Well, for many men of my generation, and me and Ryan too, and Roger, having video games, well, some people claim that video games, music, and movies, violence in it doesn't affect, but I do believe it certainly does, because whole subcultures are based around music and video games, like rap, hip hop, rock, pop. People dress that way, and video games in particular. I do believe the video game makers are definitely promoting violence, because when video games first started out, like Nintendo, Tetris, Super Mario, there was not much violence in those games. It's basically like putting puzzles together and jumping over like monsters or something. But the games today, like Grand Theft Auto, and other violent video games, basically you go around and kill random people, pedestrians on the street. You can rob, hijack them. They have prostitution in the video games. Actually,
in the games.
In the video games, and you can actually kill them too. Yes, it's extremely violent, and the ratings for these games say for adults, I mean for mature, but all children play it, and the video game makers know this. Children are raised on this. So, in my view, these violent video game and the companies, they definitely know what they are doing. And even if they are not outright killing people, they are certainly promoting violence.
Do you think that people who play it are accumulating negative karma?
If they certainly act upon it, I believe they are accumulating negative thoughts and defilements in their mind for certain, playing it. Because video games is like a drug. There is actually video game addiction. There's many youth that are addicted to video games.
But would you say it's, would it be the mental action of malice? Are they angry when they're creating video games? What do you think?
I believe the video game designers, I do believe they know what they're doing and what affects on society, just like a producer or drug dealer knows what he's doing.
Right.
So they know it's going to affect a lot of people. But like the other venerables said, their main motivation is profit. So if people are entertained by it, even if other lives or countless lives are being affected by it in a destructive manner, they don't really care because it sells and they're making a lot of money.
Right. But my question is, when you were children and played video games, were you accumulating negative karma? When you were doing these violent... Let's shift it and have somebody else. Yeah.
Well, from experience, I know that video games have made me angry, and I've seen they've made other people angry. And that young man from our young adults retreat said he was crying while mowing the lawn, and he had all sorts of negative emotions because of a video game. So it generates these very harmful mind states. It absolutely does. And especially there's a lot of war games, and they'll put terrorists, which are Muslim people or Arab people, or they'll put Nazis. They'll put specific groups of people that
So
are
the
real.
the children are creating negative karma playing these games.
Yes, because of the mind states that are generated.
Yeah.
I believe they are creating negative karma because the video games are very engaging. It requires the player to actually think, and the person must be able, because there's levels of difficulty and the rewards that comes with it. So you need to actually plot to get the killings done. Then you get all these points that come into it. So it involves. I don't think if you are really engaged in it, you can tell reality from a game. That you feel like you are actually doing it.
Okay, we're going to move on now. Sorry. Again, because otherwise we'll talk about video games for an hour. And I want to get through to the third precept because I have a whole long list with that one. You know, actually, I'd like to get through all 10, but, you know. So we're just sharing some ideas to get people to think here. Okay, let's move on to stealing. So what about not paying taxes if you disagree with how the government spends the money? Is that stealing? What is that? And if you know, so it could involve also lying because you don't declare things, because you don't want to pay the taxes, because you disagree with how the government spends money. Yeah.
I think it's a form of stealing because the government produces public goods that you enjoy a lot of it. So it's when you don't pay the due taxes, you are enjoying public goods as part of the whole deal that you're not paying for.
Yeah. Yeah. People often ask me about this one, and I tell them what, in the days when I paid taxes, what I would do is I would write on my check, use for social services or do not use for munitions. And so in my mind, I made very clear that I was not supporting those kind of activities, but I was supporting government activities that I think were beneficial for the society.
What if a large group of citizens decided collectively to not pay their taxes because they thought the government was out of control of their hands anymore? Say the current administration were to get much worse and we felt that it needed to be shut down and everybody decided to not pay their taxes in order to do that. I don't think that would be stealing. I think that would be kind of like not paying an employee you're trying to fire.
Except it really wouldn't work because, like you said, the government's providing all sorts of services that we need to benefit. And if everybody stops paying taxes, then those services are not going to, like the entitlement programs, are not going to be you know. So that kind of strategy, I don't think is going to work.
Yeah, I don't know if it would or not, but I was thinking of something with where they had demands of we need change because also the people that are running the government aren't going to let it fail. They want to keep on top. But anyways, what I'm saying is if people did it as a collective social movement, I wouldn't feel that would be stealing. I personally lived under the amount of
That's fine. That's totally legal. Yeah.
For me, I would engage in the democratic process to get things changed instead of withdrawing from paying taxes because, you know, I'd like the garbage to be taken away. It's as simple as that, you know. So I would engage in the process that has been designed for us to get involved and tell the people that represent me and us what I would like and do it that way.
Okay. Are there any things about stealing that I've missed? Okay.
I've been thinking about everything we've talked about so far, that what you might say about this would depend a lot on your view. We happen to be Buddhists, so we have this view about like all of these topics. But for me, I find it helpful to think more about ethics as like gravity. You know, ethics is like, or karma is like a natural law in the sense of like gravity.
Yeah.
And just think about, as you're talking about these, I'm thinking about what would lead to happiness and what would lead to suffering. Because a lot of these people's views are so different about, like every single one of these, it would all depend on a person's viewpoint.
Yeah. And that's, I think, part of what I'm trying to get at too, is that because we have to be very careful in when we're talking about virtue and non-virtue, that we don't define non-virtue as everything that the people whose opinions we don't agree with do. You know? Because the law of karma, it doesn't matter what political party you're in or what view you have, but to analyze some of these things from the viewpoint of, does it fulfill the requirements for these negative actions as outlined in the Lamrim? So that's why I was pushing on the video one, because the video one does not fulfill the action of killing according to the Lamrim for either the person who plays it or the person who makes it. Yeah. So then, then which one would it fall under? Yeah. It would be a mental thing, or maybe it could be associated with killing, but not an actual act of killing. Yeah. Or would it be malice for the people who are playing it? Would it be covet, what? And you can look, when you look at this, when you try and think of the people both who are playing it and the people designing it, that there's probably a big diversity of motivations in there too. Yeah, that we would have to look at.
What I think about with this is when we think about the power of using our imagination and visualizing things and how that progresses us along the path, the power of that.
Yes.
This is the opposite direction, but a similar method. So it is extremely powerful, and it will have effects.
But it becomes hard to put it under one of the 10, doesn't it? I completely agree with you, but what of the 10 do I put it under? Yeah. Well, they say in general that the 10 include in a general way most negativities, not all. Okay, let's move on here. Although, Tracy, did you have? Yeah.
Maybe there's some similarity. Some things now to be stolen or that can be stolen are intellectual property. So it's very intangible and hard to define. And how do you get it when you've got it? And also the internet. I mean, even borrowing bandwidth for getting online or things like that.
Yeah. 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 Hacking and
identities.
Yeah, what would you call that? Overuse of bandwidth or
hitchhiking?
They call it hitchhiking?
I think I heard that somewhere. Getting on someone's internet.
Oh, yes, identity theft. Yeah, now these are interesting because the traditional definition of killing is there has to be an object involved. Stealing, yes, there has to be an object involved. So within identity theft, there is not an object that is getting moved from one place to another that you say, now I have.
But you're using nobody just takes someone's identity just to be somebody else. They're using it to steal whatever property those people have.
Okay.
So if it's their credit or if it's their actual money coming from an account or something along that nature, they're using it to steal their property.
Yeah, so the stealing would be when they're actually taking the property, having assumed the person's identity. But wouldn't identity theft be lying? Wouldn't you put that under lying? and then the property that they take by using somebody else's identity would be stealing.
Venerable, there are examples in the Lamrim, though, of like if someone owns a field and someone manipulates to have a deed or something, and they haven't moved the field, but they think now that's mine.
Right.
And I wonder if I understand your point about lying, that you're misrepresenting who you are by using someone else's identity, but it is a person's. I bet you could make a case that it's a person's property. Their identity is their property.
Yeah, the things with, also if two people own a house and you take it over, you haven't moved it from one place to the other. But still, there's a pointable physical object, the field, the house. With identity, maybe you could point to the piece of paper that's the driver's license. Yeah. The Social Security, but a number is just. Yeah, but it's this whole thing also about intellectual property and music and so on, because you aren't actually, taking something. I mean, in the case of intellectual property in music, you're stealing in the sense that you're depriving that person of making money from something that is usually sold that they would receive some income from. Yeah. But just taking their Social Security number before you've used it for something else. Yeah, would you put that under lying, under stealing? Something to think about. Okay, let's go on to unwise and unkind sexual behavior. This one is in the news a whole lot, yeah? And this one, I think, depends also on the sexual mores of society. I think you've heard me say that when I heard one of my teachers describing it in the traditional way, that what was, aside from going outside a legally established relationship, if it was sexual misconduct if somebody else had paid for the prostitute, but then you slept with her. Yeah. And I just, went through the ceiling when I heard that one. But you have, in ancient India, it was completely socially acceptable to have multiple wives and also prostitutes. I mean, one of the Buddhas, Visheka, we have a park named after her. She was a courtesan, yeah, and a very devout disciple of the Buddha. So in that culture, that was, it was okay, but it wasn't okay, because whenever they wanted to insult the nuns, they would insult them by calling them prostitutes. So it wasn't okay in that sense. They weren't respected, but it was okay in another sense that it was very socially acceptable. Okay. I don't know back in the Buddha's time if young children got sold into prostitution. Yeah. If you watch the half of the sky, the video Nick Kristof made, he was saying that in India there's one caste or subcaste where it's assumed the women in that subcaste will become prostitutes. And if you're born in that subcaste, that's what you do. Okay, and they featured one woman who was trying to prevent that happening, for the daughters to automatically go into prostitution. But our society has a different view, by and large, about prostitution, although, again, it's something that's discussed a lot. Also, in Tibet, it was completely acceptable for a woman to have many husbands. They practiced polyandry, not polygamy, but the woman could have many husbands. Whereas in our culture, again, that would not be socially acceptable. So I think in those kind of situations, that's going to depend, a little bit on what the society thinks. In terms of the one about prostitution, is there a difference between a woman who voluntarily goes and becomes a prostitute, not because of financial need, but that's just what she chooses for her occupation? Because I've seen interviews with women who say that this is their field and, they want to be able to do it. So what about those cases versus cases when, people are duped into prostitution or, their pimps get them hooked on drugs so that then they'll prostitute to pay for the drugs. Those kinds of things I think we can see. But again, is it unwise sexual behavior from the part of the prostitute, from the part of the John, from the part of the pimp? Who creates negative karma when it's a situation of forced prostitution? And then the other question about when women voluntarily choose to do it, or men voluntarily choose to be prostitutes, then what?
In my job, I did work with some women that were in prostitution or in those clubs where they do the dancing and that kind of thing. So, and I never met, and they would say that it's my choice, but I have never met one of those women who didn't have the conditioning of being treated as an object and being treated, very poorly. And so, in my mind, it really isn't a choice. It is a conditioning, and it is based on being treated very badly.
What about like the women, even if they're into, they want to be a prostitute and that's what they do, a lot of the men that they sleep with are married.
Yes.
So then that's negative, the negative karma.
Right. On the other hand, when that happens, is that the woman's responsibility? Should she ask every client beforehand, are you married? Is it the man's responsibility? Or is that just a danger of the trade? Yeah. Should prostitution be legalized so that they have proper health care? But I've seen interviews with women who just say, yeah, this is my choice. This is what I want to do. Yeah. So, but she's saying that it may be because of previous conditioning too.
I actually saw something, I don't know how long ago, it was a young woman who was, I think it was beyond the prostitute. She was more up into those madame places where they have the high-rise hotels and the suites and stuff. She was a single mother with a child, and she was making about $40,000 a week. And she said, I'm doing this for my daughter.
Yep. And that's what a lot of women do because, to support their kids.
I was thinking about, I don't know about this country's law, but in Singapore, we have a term statutory rape, where if you have sex with a girl that's under 16,
yes,
you can go to jail.
Yeah, we have that too.
Yeah, and that is it sexual misconduct or is it not? If it's consensual, but then legally you will be punished.
Yeah. Well, we can't, when evaluating whether something is virtuous or non-virtuous, we can't use the legal standard. Yeah. But, in a society where sleeping with somebody under 16 is considered improper, yeah, then in general, you could say that would be negative, but what about, there's all sorts of teenagers that have sex, when they're 16 and younger. So if it's consensual, then what? Especially if it's with a boy who's just a year or two older than them, not somebody who's, a generation older than them. Yeah. What about that? Everybody's so quiet now. Yeah.
Think of all of our younger years.
Yes. Did we create negative karma?
That example, in terms of the immediate result, I don't think it's happiness. I mean, it causes tremendous emotional confusion, right? Difficult relationships, unwanted pregnancies, and so forth.
But that happens for adults too.
Right. Oh,
so
why should it be age specific?
Yeah. So
right?
yeah. And what about societies where getting married when you're 11 or 12 is legal? Does that mean that ethically it's okay? Yeah. And what about something like female genital mutilation? Yeah, in some cultures, it's a must. But is that something that creates non-virtue?
Seems to me that it would be hard to use. You couldn't define anything if you just said it was due to conditioning, because everything is conditioned. So that gets everything too muddy. So to me, I have to go back to motivation. And a lot of these, I think we're talking about ignorance as the the affliction that's involved, like straight out ignorance. So I think a lot of these are creating karma, and we're so ignorant that we don't know it.
Could you give some examples of the ones in which you think we are creating karma?
Yeah, I think like when, say, teenagers being sexual, for example, yeah, it was pretty darn normal when I was a teenager. Some were, some weren't. It was normal whether you were or weren't. It was just like, but did that make it karma free? I don't think so.
Yeah.
It had effects on people's lives. You just couldn't see what was coming. And it brought a lot of suffering or happiness. I think actually that ignorance is at play in a lot of this.
The discussion about women choosing to do it for their kids because prostitution, because it makes a lot of money, reminded me of some about pornography and how women often will get involved in that as well for the same purpose of I've watched documentaries about some stay in that field because it's a way to make a lot of money quickly for their family, and the effects of that on the people who are involved and the people who are watching, when violence is often involved, and the karma created through that.
So who's creating the negative karma? The woman who stars in porn shows or who prostitutes in order to support her kids? The Johns, what about the guys who go to these women? Are they creating negative karma? What about if they're single? They're single, she's single, it's consensual. Is she creating negative karma by being a prostitute, but he isn't? And what about the pimp?
Yes, Venerable, I believe a lot of these non-virtues are interrelated. A lot of women are objectified in the society sexually, and at the same time a lot of men are conditioned violently, and prostitution and also mercenary are considered, they say it's old professions. And in the same manner, a lot of veterans or people with military experience, they get lucrative offers to become quote-unquote private contractors, which are mercenaries. They're hired by other governments to go fight in wars as private, and they're killing people for money. And they will use the justification that they're feeding their family. And they make a lot more money than they do in the military. Because a lot of especially if you're trained in combat unit, when you return to civilian life, your skills are not marketable. So a lot of them get caught up in the mercenary world. And like right now, in the current wars, there's more mercenaries, private contractor mercenaries, than there are regular soldiers. And that's not really discussed, but I feel it's like interconnected with like prostitution.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe all the people involved in it are definitely having negative karma. The company, people that hire, the governments, and mercenaries. Same with, because it's all based on exploitation, whether sexual exploitation or violent exploitation.
Yeah, yeah. But we tend to focus on the person doing the action that we disagree with, like the prostitute or the mercenary soldier. But this is a very good point. What about there's a whole system involved here. Yeah. So, but then when you look, if you ask, okay, well, what about the pimp? Which of the 10 is he creating? Can you point to one of the 10 that he's creating? What would you put it under?
I was gonna say
What?
lying because they lured women or with the idea that they were gonna take care of them, that they were gonna provide for their needs, and instead they exploit them, or they tell them that they love them, or they are indispensable for their they protect them or whatever, and then the women believe it, or and then just fall prey to that.
So you think it's only a verbal offense, or is there something physical involved too?
I don't think it's only verbal.
I mean, because I would say that the pimp also would be involved in stealing. Yeah, because they take the money.
Singapore prostitution is legal. Yeah, you have to be with a registered brothel and whatever, and the police come and they do health checks. But the pimp, they go after the pimp. I think under the law, it's defined as living off a woman's gains, something like that. Yeah, I don't know the exact details, but that's how you can prosecute a pimp who is hiring streetwalkers and not associated with a legal brothel.
I think too, this whole trajectory of prostitution, the women that I've worked with, it might start out to be either through monetary or, a pimp saying, I'll take care of you or whatever. And it goes along, and then sooner or later, the power and the exploitation gets worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
And it always goes into then violence, because if you go against what the pimp says, they beat you so that you comply. And so it's this cascading.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not just one thing.
Yeah. It's not easily put in. And manipulating and exploiting is, maybe you can put it under lying, maybe. Yeah. But I don't know.
Yeah, so kind of going back to sexual misconduct, I was just thinking of a situation here. One of my colleagues from college, he was going out with this girl at the time, and he told me about how at times when he wanted to make love with her and she didn't want to, she would just tell him just like to go watch porn and do his thing. And so I was just seeing that as another form of sexual misconduct, but also it's like she's like telling him to go do.
She's what?
She's telling him to pretty much just go masturbate and take care of you.
Yeah. This actually brings up another topic. What about date rape? Yeah, where she says no, but he pushes.
It's rape. It's unkind sexual behavior. I can't see any way around that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just what they're talking about in colleges is you have to verbally ask somebody for permission for each step. Really? Is that the way things naturally happen?
But you can listen to a no.
Huh?
You can listen to a no when it gets to a certain point.
Yes, quite
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah. Yeah, and to respect a no.
Of course, it gets a little bit more complicated when the woman has been drinking all night. And so half of her clothes seem to have, she's just lost her sense of herself. And so then it becomes, well, whose fault is it? She's drunk. She doesn't know what she's doing. And I was there and I came on to her and she didn't, she said no, but she was, there's a lot
or
of.
she didn't say
she
no.
didn't say no because
she
she's
was
just
drunk
so loaded.
and,
She can't.
she didn't even know what was
So
going on.
I have total power to do this, So once again, it falls back on the woman. Forget about your own integrity. She's confused. She's drunk. She's not taking care of herself. That doesn't give you the right to have a power over in that situation.
Yeah, for sure. That doesn't give you the right to
take advantage
of somebody. On the other hand, shouldn't we also teach women how to protect themselves?
And not put themselves in these positions where they're going to get into trouble like that. Yeah. The self-respect.
Yeah. Because sometimes now people are going in the opposite thing of, doesn't matter. It's true. Whether she's conscious or unconscious, drunk or not, that doesn't give you permission to rape. But, we should learn how to protect ourselves too and not put ourselves in situations. I know from living in India, I see young women go to India and they just think, well, I can dress here the same way I dress in the West. Now, you can say the same thing just because somebody is scantily dressed doesn't give men permission to take advantage of them. On the other hand, the woman could learn to think, I'm in a different culture and people relate to flesh in a different way, and I need to, it would be to my own advantage to dress according to the culture. Yeah. So, yeah, it's not saying that what the guys do are okay. It's saying that the women can do something to prevent it.
It's quite easy to say the date rape that, of course, it's wrong if the woman is drunk. But what about the man?
You mean
he's
if
probably
he's
drunk too?
Yeah, right. Yeah, but does being drunk mean that you didn't? Most of the guys I work with in prison did their crimes when they were intoxicated. But that you can't go say that to the jury, and that's not an excuse.
Yeah, it's not an excuse. But in rape, it wouldn't be an excuse for the man. But what about the woman? Alcohol is an excuse for her because she wasn't able to take care of herself, but it's not an excuse for the man because he can't take care of himself. I mean, it's kind of like an interesting situation there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
A more general comment from someone online, I think, that was getting to about whether a prostitute who's single and a man who's single, what karma does that create? And she says, I wonder about the causal results of putting so much emphasis on the body as just an object of sexual pleasure. So just the attachment you're playing out that, just creating negative karma in itself.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, whether there's ignorance involved or not, attachment is behind that crime. Although I've heard very often women say that rape is not a sexual act, it's a violent act. Yeah. And in that way, saying it really shouldn't even be under unwise and unkind sexual behavior. It should be more under, something of violence, physical violence against somebody. Or maybe it overlaps between the two things. Okay. What about sexual harassment in the workplace? They didn't talk about that in the Lamrim. Yeah. And I think in ancient India, it was free, Even now, just...
Once again, I would say it's unkind. It's unkind sexual behavior.
Okay.
We could define even flirting as sexual behavior. It depends on the motivation. It doesn't have to be copulation.
Yeah. So this is an interesting thing. What happens in a workplace, if two people are flirting with each other? and then one of them goes a step further than the other one would want, and the other one says harassment.
It seems like most of the rules in workplace around sexual harassment also has a component of power, somebody over.
Mm-hmm.
So it isn't so much peers, but somebody over generally, it seems like, for it to go anywhere anyhow. I know it happens peer to peer too.
Yeah, if it is peer to peer, I mean, I would think that could be called sexual harassment.
Yes, but it's harder to get people to
pay attention
to it.
But does that mean that it's not sexual harassment?
No, it's sexual harassment.
Yeah. So if there is a power differential, and it's you either sleep with me or you don't get promoted or something like that. So does that, again, it's a whole thing of exploitation. Does that fall under unwise and unkind, sexual behavior? Does it fall under harsh words? Does it fall under lying? Is it a combination of all of those? Well, coveting is the mental act, but here somebody is either physically doing something or saying something too. So you definitely have the coveting, but, is it a verbal action? Is it maybe it's verbal and then, it becomes physical too. Yeah, but which verbal? Is it harsh words when you manipulate, when you force somebody like that? You say in a very sweet voice.
I think the hard piece with sexual harassment too is that the man in power does not see his behavior as threatening in any way.
Yeah.
Like when I've been on the receiving end, it seemed to be totally normal to the other person. I'm like, what is your hand doing in my lap? Like, as a young journalist, I was sent to cover the opening of a bar by the male editor, opening of a bar by his friend, who decided it was perfectly okay to keep touching me. And like, what was I was like, how do I get out of this? Who do I even talk to about this?
Mm-hmm.
But to him, it's like normal, right? Here's
Yeah.
a young girl covering the story.
Yeah.
It was, I quit.
Yeah. This is part of the difficulty with sexual harassment things, is the men say, but I didn't do anything, This is just the way you behave with an attractive woman. What did I do wrong?
There's an interesting story in the New York Times today about Hillary Clinton's new book that's coming out, and she was describing this scene when she was debating with Donald Trump, and he was stalking her around the stage. And she has had this thought, do I confront this or do I just keep smiling and acting like this is okay? And she did that, making case in her own mind that it was probably better to keep her composure. But she's second guessing herself now, like, this was inappropriate behavior. He was intimidating me. He was trying to intimidate me or her.
Yeah.
And, that she played it out in her mind that perhaps it would have been better to call the crime that it was in that moment. So it's interesting.
Okay, so we got through 3 of them. Do you feel this kind of discussion is helpful? It's complicated, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's necessary and it's important, and it's something that we need to discuss with people when we talk about Dharma. Yeah, basic ethical behavior. And we can't just keep on going through the list, that sounds so clear. Yeah, because these are the kinds of things that happen to people nowadays.
It's interesting to try and tie that to what's going on in a culture at a present time, because the culture is changing. And partially because people are standing up and saying, no, this is not appropriate. And now we have a voice that we can say that.
Yeah.
I was wondering if any of the Bhikshu and Bhikshuni precepts have been classified into which of the 10 they would fall under, because there's things like a bhikshu talking lewdly or sexually provocatively to a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Is that under speech? Is that under sexual misconduct? Is there any traditional material where they categorize that?
I haven't seen traditional material, but Venerable Wu Yin, in choosing simplicity, she took a lot of the precepts and categorized them according to the kinds of activities they pertain to, which I think is very helpful. Yeah. And so some of them she may put in one category, but I'm sure she would say it's also related to this and related to that and related to the other one too. Yeah. But I think it's a very interesting, very helpful way actually to study the precepts, because then you see why, if you abandon doing certain more innocuous things, you prevent yourself from getting in situations where you transgress major precepts.
The intoxicants is not one of the 10, and it's considered not to be naturally harmful.
Yeah.
That and some things are not complete karmas. So a lot of what we're talking about, like with the video games or whatever, if it's affecting your mind, it's creating some kind of karma, whether we can label it or not, it seems.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So some things may be complete, some things may not. There's still karma created. Yeah. But, yeah. But to really delve in and see, is it a full karma or is it a partial one?
Just really quick, can you define the difference between a karma and an incomplete karma?
Yeah, a full, complete karma has 4 parts to it. First, there's an object. Okay. Then the second is your attitude, and that has 3 parts. So one is you identify the object correctly. Yeah. You have an intention. And third, there's an affliction affiliated with your intention. So those 3 together form the second factor. Then the third factor is that the action is performed. And the fourth is that it is completed. Okay? And they say that something that has all 4 branches complete has the power to throw a rebirth in samsara. Yeah. Ones that don't have all branches complete don't have that same power. But that's why it's, I think, important to really look at some of these and to see, are they full or are they not? And if they, do they have to conform to the exact definition in the 10 in order to be a full karma or not? Yeah, like the sexual harassment, that wouldn't conform to the strict definition. If it's verbal, it could be harsh words, in which it could be the full action of harsh words. Yeah. Maybe not the full action of unwise and unkind sexual behavior, but the one of harsh words. Yeah.
Just one thing that the Buddha taught, that it's not so much karma, but it pertains to this in my mind, because when he taught the parajika for the bhikshunis about the 8 activities, you can do those 8 different activities at all different times. But once you've done all 8, you've really created yourself a big problem. And to me, it's kind of similar here. We might not complete a karma in one instant, but the whole continuity of all these incomplete karmas start to have some force to them.
Yeah, but they may still all be incomplete ones.
Right. Yeah. But still,
you're
adding
in
up
that
a lot.
bhikshuni precept, it's delineated as, and that's just in terms of the precept, which is different than the negativity. Yeah.
To me, it gives me the notion of things start to add up.
Yeah, quite definitely. Yeah. Okay, so we have to stop now. We will continue. Do you want to continue this next week? Do you find it helpful? Yeah? Okay, good, because I think this kind of thing, it's important to think about these things because people will come to us and say, this has happened in my life, and what do I do? Another thing that we didn't talk about, we talked about video games, but what about music? And the intention with some people write or play music. So we should get to that too.